Like throwing a rock in a still pool of water, the aftermath of the Sandbar Duel reverberated around the world. James Bowie's individuality and triumph in the face of overwhelming odds made him the very embodiment of the American spirit.
Captain John B. Nevitt owned the Claremont Plantation, just north of Natchez. It was to here that the Maddox party came in the days prior to the Sandbar fight. We're standing right now on those bluffs. From here you can look down to the river, see the old channel, see almost what they would have seen in 1827. The sandbar's not there anymore, but you can imagine that you could see it. Certainly they could see it from this location. There's no doubt that when Maddox's second, Robert Crane, met with Sam Wells' second at Peter Little's sawmill at Natchez under the Hill, it was Crane who proposed that site for the duel. In 1827, the Mississippi River formed a great oxbow above the city of Natchez. Now, the Sandbar fight was to be fought on the first sandbar above the city of Natchez, and that was located on the lower side of that big oxbow. In 1933, the Corps of Engineers began cutting a straight path, the Giles Cutoff, that would isolate that oxbow from the main part of Adams County. And so the Sandbar fight, the site of it today, is actually located on what is now known as Giles Island, an exclusive hunting preserve.
Today, Giles Island is known for monster bucks, white-tailed deer. We operate as Giles Island Hunting Club. The owner is Steve Bancroft from Monroe, Louisiana, and we sell 3-day deer hunting packages. We also do a little turkey hunting in the spring and fishing in the spring and summer. Anyone can visit Giles Island simply by making a phone call to our toll-free number and making a reservation, whether it's a deer hunting trip or a turkey hunting trip or a fishing trip. Or if you just want to come over for, say, like a bed and breakfast, which our bed and breakfast includes 3 meals a day, because you're secluded on this island. You can't get in your car and leave. We have to take you by boat. So we provide 3 meals a day, and we'll take you for a tour of the island. We'll see all kind of wildlife, the deer, the turkeys, coyotes, raccoons, all kind of hawks and owls. We have some bird watchers come over, and tons of birds over here, all kind of shore birds and cranes and all your songbirds and hawks. We even see eagles over here. So it's kind of an adventure in itself to come to Giles Island. You're away from the real world. If you want to check us out further, you can call our secretary, Sue, at 877-944-5374 or log on to our website. It's gilesisland.com.
We are standing on the actual site of the Sandbar fight, determined by the location of this levee that was built shortly afterwards. The river would have been right over there in the trees, and the sandbar in this grassy area right here. Today the river is further south, but this is where it happened. The Maddox party had spent the night at Captain John Nevitt's plantation Claremont on the bluffs. They mounted their horses and descended the bluffs, came down, crossed Shillings Bayou, and planted themselves in the woods at the east end of the sandbar. Today, Shillings Bayou is now called Short's Lake. The Wells party, including James Bowie, had stayed the night before at the Alexander House in Vidalia. They crossed the river by boat and came here. On the previous day, at the meeting at Peter Little's sawmill, they had determined that because of the hostilities that existed between the two factions, not only between Bowie and Norris Wright, but also between Bowie's friend General Cuny and Maddox's second, Robert Crane, that the parties would have to be separated. They could not come out on the field. So on the field itself, you had simply Wells and Dr. Maddox, Wells' second, Major McWhorter. You had Maddox's second, Robert Crane. All the others were required to be back in the woods. Right at noon, Wells and Maddox faced each other, pistols primed and ready. On the count, they aimed, fired, and they both missed. The code encourages a second firing, and so the pistols were recharged. And again, Wells and Maddox aimed, fired, and missed again. At that point, Wells and Maddox determined that their honor was satisfied. They shook hands in the middle of the sandbar. And then Wells suggested that they all retire to where his friends were in the trees to have some libation. But the Maddox party resisted. There was Bowie, and there was General Cuny, and members of the Maddox party should not go there. So they started to retire instead to the Maddox camp. At that point, Bowie and Cuny emerged from the trees, came down onto the sandbar. Robert Crane, who previously had had great hostility with General Cuny, confronted each other. Crane, as the second for Maddox, was still holding 2 loaded pistols in case there was to have been a third shooting. Cuny and Bowie walked up to him. Cuny demanded to know what had happened. He demanded that he and Crane should settle their differences at that very moment. Nervously, Crane raised his 2 pistols and fired both of them. The first shot spun Bowie around and dropped him to the ground. The second shot hit Cuny. He fell, mortally wounded. The sandbar fight had begun. Bowie rose up, advanced towards Crane. Bowie pulled that knife from his scabbard. Crane still held 2 empty pistols. He flung one of them at Bowie. It struck Bowie in the head, creating a bloody gash in his forehead. Bowie dropped again to the ground. Crane turned and ran. At this point, the Maddox party was emerging from the trees at the east end of the sandbar. They included Bowie's nemesis, Major Norris Wright, and the Blanchard brothers, friends of Wright. They advanced on Bowie. Bowie staggered, fell near a snag rising up out of the sand. Major McWhorter, who was Wells' second, handed Bowie a pistol. Bowie and Wright exchanged shots. Both men were hit, but neither fatally. At that point, Wright and the Blanchard brothers pulled out sword canes and advanced on Bowie. Bowie drew the knife again. One slash took the fight out of Alfred Blanchard, but Norris Wright closed in again, plunging his sword cane into Bowie's chest. Bowie brought his knife up into Major Wright's heart. Wright fell across Bowie, the 2 men lying there, their blood mingling in the sand. The fight had become general. Pistols on both sides were blazing. Dr. Denny lost a finger to a pistol ball. Other men were wounded. But Wells and Maddox managed to prevail and brought the fight to an end. Incredibly, only 2 men, General Cuny and Norris Wright, were dead. James Bowie had been shot 2 or 3 times and stabbed 6 or 7. He was conveyed back across the river to the Alexander House in Vidalia. The Natchez newspaper that reported the incident did not even know his first name. The paper stated that Mr. Blank Bowie is not expected to survive. But James Bowie did survive his wounds, and a legend was born here on this sandbar. It was the beginning of a legend for Bowie and for his knife. Bowie would go to Texas. He would engage in Indian fights with Mexican soldados. Usually outnumbered, he would almost always triumph until the Alamo. He would become known as the greatest fighter in the Southwest. But all of that began right here on the sandbar. James Bowie took a knife to a gunfight. The sandbar fight made Bowie a legend, but it also made his knife a legend. In subsequent retellings, either orally or in the newspapers, that knife became the American equivalent to King Arthur's Excalibur. Within less than a decade after the sandbar fight, newspapers around the country were advertising the sale of Bowie knives. The first Bowie knives were actually American-made, made by very skilled cutlers who might also be surgical tool makers or gunsmiths. Men like Daniel Searles of Baton Rouge or Henry Shively of Philadelphia. Those are the knives most prized by collectors today. But at that time, the cutlery center of the world was Sheffield, England. And when they discovered there was a demand for Bowie knives in America, they geared up for it. Bowie knives became England's second major export to the United States. It is estimated that between 75 and 90% of all the Bowie knives carried on the American frontier were made in Sheffield, England. Whether made in Sheffield, England, or in America, those early Bowie knives were very finely made instruments. Handles might be ebony, ivory, mother of pearl, or stag. The majority of those early knives had two distinctive features, a crossguard and a clip point, features that would define the Bowie knife today. Though it's very doubtful that the knife that James Bowie wielded with such effect on that sandbar had either of those features. Whatever its configuration, the Bowie knife would carve its name into the pages of American history. Whatever it looked like, the Bowie knife was certainly one of the very first American fads, and it became standard equipment on the frontier.